Thank you, Madam Witness, for telling us what happened to you. I know how difficult it must be. I'll come back to pick up what you were telling us about the interrogation, but first I want to go back to ask some details about some of the things you just told us. You indicated that after your husband was arrested, you were sent to work in a widow's unit. Could you tell us how long you worked in that widow's unit before the time you were arrested? Or in other words, how long was it after your husband's arrest that you were arrested and sent to Krang Tachan?
My husband was arrested and sent in the transplanting season. And after the harvest season, we were sent to work on the dike system, and that when I was arrested. However, I cannot recall the period between my husband's arrest and when I was arrested. I only knew that he was arrested during the rice transplanting season.
The period between when your husband was arrested and you were arrested, was it a short period, just a few weeks, or was it a longer period, a number of months?
If I recall it correctly, my husband was arrested when my daughter became seriously ill. We didn't have any treatment for her, and I was told that there was no need to look after my daughter, and the old women would look after her, and that I had to return to work. At that time, my daughter was still young. She was a bit over a year old. She started walking at the time. And that was the time that my husband was arrested. And later on, during the harvest season, and it was almost over when I was arrested. And when my daughter was sick, I wanted her to be sent to a hospital, but the village chief denied the request.
Thank you, Madam Witness. You also told us that when you were arrested, your 1-year-old child was arrested with you. Did you have other children? And if so, what happened to them when you were arrested?
I had 2 children when I was arrested. However, the youngest one died. And only later on, when I remarried, I have 3 more children.
The child of yours that died, did this child die before Krang Tachan or while you were at Krang Tachan?
ស្លាប់មុន
She died before I was sent to Kangtachan.
How old was your child who died before you were sent to Krang Tachan? And was this a boy or a girl? Can you tell us what happened to that child?
It was my son. He died after I delivered him, not long after I delivered him, because of the improper delivery. He died.
Thank you, Madam Witness. Mr. President, with your leave, at this point I'd like to provide a document to the witness, a Krang Tachan prisoner list, to see if that helps refresh a recollection about the timing of when she was sent to Krang Tachan. This is document E3/4164, E3/4164. With your leave, may I provide this to the witness?
Yes, you can do so.
Madam Witness, the document that you've been provided is a prisoner list titled Brief Biographies of Prisoners at Tramcock District Education Office. The second prisoner on this list, and I've highlighted that information to make it easy for you, is yourself, a person named Vorn Saroon, a 27 female from Kache Village, Dongtong Commune in Kampot, married to a husband named Prak Set. And this prisoner list records the date of your arrival at Krang Tachan as the 23rd of May, 1977. Does that refresh your recollection about when you were arrested and sent to Krang Tachan? Was it, in fact, around May 1977?
While the witness is thinking, could you please provide us with the reference, the ERN number?
Yes, Your Honor. It's the second person on the list. The specific ERN references are English 00973-147, French 00937-104, and in Khmer, it's a two-page document, and it's on her information goes across both pages. Just to make sure the record is clear, that the English ERN. So, and the document again is E3/4164. Madam Witness, does this refresh your recollection that the time you were arrested and sent to Krang Tachan was in May of 1977?
Yes, I recall it. However, I was not asked whether I stayed at the hospital in the Takeo provincial town, because after the country was liberated, I was transferred to work in that hospital. Then I was assigned to work in the rice field for 2 years before I was sent to Tram Kok district.
Now, the prisoner whose name appears immediately below yours, so it's the third person in this list, is identified as Uch Han, a 26-year-old female medic from Trapyeong Kul, who arrived on the same date as you, the 23rd of May, 1977. Is this the person that you referred to earlier, named Han, the female who you met and who was sent to Krang Tachan with you?
Yes, that is correct. However, I do not know the surname of that woman. I only know her name as it was known as Han.
Now, in the far right column for both yourself and Han, if you look at the second page of your document is where you'll find that column. The list indicates that yourself and Han had been arrested because you were implicated in the responses of Hong and Kong. And I'd like to ask you now a few questions about the two people who are referenced here, Hong and Kong. You've already identified for us that Kong, a person named Kong, was the head of Hospital 22. Do you remember, were you still at Hospital 22? And do you remember whether Kong was arrested at some point?
One night, I did not know when, all the medical staff were called to attend a meeting. And Kong told my husband and myself that we would be transferred to Tram Kok district. And after the meeting was concluded, I saw a Lampreter vehicle, and my husband and I were put onto that Lampreter, and I didn't know where we were sent to because it was dark. And by dawn, we arrived at a location where I learned that it was Tram Kok district. And I did not know Tram Kok district before. So we didn't know about the location that we were transferred to, although later on I knew it was a Tram Kok district. And later on, my husband also told me that Takong was arrested, though he didn't know where he was sent to. And on the night of the meeting at the Hospital 22, I saw a large vehicle which transported all the medical staff to somewhere. And they were called to board that truck, although I did not know the reason for them being put into that truck. However, my husband and I were put into a lampreter. And as I said, later on we learned that Kong was also arrested.
At this meeting at Hospital 22, did Kong tell you or the other staff why you were being sent away?
No, we were not told anything. However, because we stay close to other medical staff, and they were instructed to board a separate vehicle, while my husband and I were instructed to board that lampreter vehicle. And after that, I did not know what happened to those medical staff.
How many people worked as medical staff at the hospital, and how many of them were taken away that night?
There were more than 20 medical staff at that hospital, including men and women. However, I did not know who were called to board that vehicle, and it happened at night time. I saw them being called to board that vehicle, and I myself was also rather confused as we were instructed to board a separate vehicle.
Well, let me now ask you about the other person that was referenced in the list I provided you, which indicated that you were arrested because you had been implicated by two people, Kong and Hong. Did you know a staff or cadre named Hong who worked at Hospital 22?
It seems that I cannot recall anyone by the name of Hong, or it could be an alias for a person that I knew. I cannot say.
Mr. President, with your leave, at this time I'd like to provide another document to the witness to see if I can refresh her recollection about Hong. This is Krang Tachan Notebook D15713, D157.13. And the relevant ERN references are Khmer 00270-827 through 829, English 010-64-174 through 176, French 00971-285 through 288. With your leave, may I provide this document to the witness?
President, you may proceed.
Madam Witness, the document I'm handing you is a notebook that has been identified as coming from Krang Tachan. it contains notes relating to a person named Hun Hong. You'll see the start of the entry for Hun Hong is on Khmer 00270827. This person is described as being 59 years old, a wife named Kam, and he was born in Chang Torn Commune, Tram District. The notes indicated that he had been assigned to be a staff member at Hospital 22 in charge of herbal medicine. Does that refresh your recollection? Do you remember this person named Hong from Hospital 22?
Answer: I do not know this name.
If you could look at the next page in Khmer, that is page 00270828, you'll see that there's a list, a numbered list of people who were identified by Han as purportedly being involved in, I quote, traitorous activities with the contemptible Kong. And there's 13 people on that first page. It continues on the next page. There's a total of 16 people listed. I first direct you to number 13, which is Run, female, Aset's wife. Can you tell us whether you were referred to by some people as Run during the Khmer Rouge period?
Answer: yes, I was referred as Run by some people.
What I'd like you to do is take a look at the list of 16 names there and tell me if you remember any of these people, whether any of the other people who are listed here were people who also worked at Hospital 22, like yourself.
President, please wait, Madam Witness. You may now proceed, Mr. Kong Sam-on. Thank you very much. Mr. President, I would like to make an observation in relation to the presentation of names by the co-prosecutor. He mentioned the name Hong. I read document D157.13 at the number mentioned by prosecutor. The name was Han, and it is not clear, and perhaps the name is not Hong. So I would like to ask the chamber to ask the co-prosecutor to clarify the name, whether it is Hong or it is another name.
Mr. President, I cannot read Khmer. I can tell you that in both the English and French translations, the name is translated as Hun. In English, Hun Hong. In the French, Hun Han. So essentially the same name. The counsel is correct that the writing is a little hard to read, but both translators were able to interpret it. Madam Witness, the question I was asking you was, looking at the list of 16 people, Are there any other names on that list that you recognize as people who worked with you at Hospital 22?
Cha.
Witness. I could not read some names because some of the names are not clear to me. And as for my names, it is clear. I could read it clearly.
Fair enough. Thank you, Madam Witness. One of the references in these notes, there is a reference to your husband, Set, and also to another cadre from Hanoi, a person who is identified as a cadre from Hanoi named Dung. Do you remember a person named Dung who worked with your husband and was also referenced as a cadre from Hanoi?
Cha, bờ cam ai ba Hanoi.
Answer. As for Hanoi cadres who were working as a surgeon with my husband, the name, one individual name was Duong, not Duan.
Thank you. I apologize for my pronunciation. Is it correct then that Duong also worked at Hospital 22 with you and your husband?
Cha.
Answer. Yes, his name was Duong. He was also a surgeon.
And do you know what happened to him during the Khmer Rouge regime? Was he also arrested like your husband and yourself?
Cha.
Answer. When my husband and I were transferred at night time, Duong and his wife, the Chinese descendant, were also transported together with us. When Duong arrived at Tramkot, I did not know where he was sent to. When we arrived at Tramkot, Duong and his wife was transferred to elsewhere. I did not know where they were transferred to.
And did you ever hear or learn after that what happened to Dung and his wife?
Cha.
Answer. I do not know. I have no information.
You've told us about your arrest. What I want to ask you now is what you can tell us about the time that your husband was arrested and taken away.
Phnom Penh.
Answer. It was almost at noon time. At noon time, when my unit returned from work, there was a person told me that Irund Tasait was arrested and sent for education. I was crying after I heard this news. I thought when I was walking back from my work, it appeared that I knew my husband was about to arrest. And there was one aunt told me about the arrest of my husband. That person told me that Tasait was arrested. I was told that Tasait was sent to help with delivery of a woman at Tropang Thom. And after I heard this news, I was weeping. I knew that if I was transferred away from my unit, I would be also killed because I learned that I was put in a class below an ordinary people group.
Did you ever see your husband again after he was taken away that day?
ọt bán chuột tệ
Answer: I did not meet him later on. At that time, I was sent to build a dam and carry earth. My unit was sent to do such work. There was a woman at that area, and she considered me as her daughter. I had a baby, and my baby's name was Churab. That lady told me that please do not cry, that your husband had already been arrested. He was walk away to the south. And after I was told about this, I was walking to the south. I could see him. I could see that he was there. When I was walking, there was a person running to hold my wrist and told me not to approach that area, otherwise I would be danger. My godmother, that is the lady who told me about this, did not tell me that my husband was put in a prison. I did not know what to do besides decided to walk to that area to see. I was thinking that if I dared walk to that place, I would see my husband detained.
Thank you for that response, Madam Witness. I want to turn now to the period that you were detained at Krang Tachan. You've already told us about your arrival and how you were shackled in a detention building for 7 days before you were taken for interrogation. I'd like you, if you can, to describe for us in a little more detail the building in which you were detained. What was that building like? How many other prisoners were detained in there with you? Can you tell us a little bit about the building in which you were detained at Krang Tachan?
cha
Answer: There were 3 buildings for keeping prisoner. One at the north side, and another one was at the east. And there were another building at another side. The building was a long one, roofed with leaves. There were wooden walls or planks. I did not pay any attention to the building. I was thinking that when I was in the building, I would die. And there was fence. There was a barbed wire fence. And the place where I was sleeping, there were also wire nets below us. So even the cockroaches and rats could not escape from that place. There were barbed wires, nets everywhere. And I thought that that place was the area that I would die there. The 3 buildings were used to keep prisoners. Ipon, Vươn, and I were put in the same prison. The whole family of Yenyo were also imprisoned at that place, but one of her daughter and one of her son were allowed to stay outside of the cells because Yenyo was a cook. And as for others who were new peasants, were imprisoned in that place. One night I heard the steps, and I heard the door was open. And the prisoner were tied 1 meter away from each other. At that night, all of us could not sleep, and babies were crying. Because of too many people in the prison, some of them were to be sent away, were to be sent home. At first, I was very happy because I heard that some prisoner would be allowed to return home. I was about to ask the people working there to allow me to go back home, but I was pinched by a lady not to do or not to ask such a thing. I could see at that time there were skinny people. They could hardly walk. I did not know whether these individuals were allowed to return home. I heard the sound of loudspeaker, music were played. And I was told that you, Irun, you perhaps were not aware of the pretext that people were sending back home. Actually, they were sent to be killed. I believe because of my good deeds, I treated people at the hospital when I was a medic, and I could survive. Prisoners were sent into Krang Tachan during the transplanting season, and these prisoners would not be killed immediately. They were asked to go and transplant with all of us. We, the prisoner, we were allowed to work outside the prison, and we were told that after some of the new prisoners had the transplanting work, they would be allowed to go back home, but actually they were taken to be killed. Prisoners were taken in one after another, and they were interrogated also one after another. I had a friend named Ron. She or he was the child of district committee. This person, Roma, did not know that their parents were arrested and put in Krang Tachan. Because I knew this person, I talked to her and I asked her, why you came here? And I was spotted talking to this individual, Rom. Later, I was put back in the prison because I was talking to this person, Rom. I knew that because I was talking to this person, I was detained back in the prison, and I stopped talking to anyone later on. Ron was also put in the prison. When we were sleeping in the same cells at night, I touched Rom. She was very skinny and bony. We could see each other only at night time. I was detained there for 7 days, and I was allowed to return back to work after the 7-day detain. And I was warned that later I should not have talked to anyone else. I could not forget all the things I experienced.
Thank you for that, all that information, Madam Witness. You indicated that the prison building you were in was very crowded. There were too many prisoners there. Are you able to give us any estimate of the total number of prisoners who were in that building with you?
Answer. If prisoners were all in such buildings, the number would reach 40 prisoners in one building, and the hall or buildings were of the same size. People were sleeping foot to foot, and there was an alley or an area for walking in between the prisoners sleeping.
You also mentioned the names of some other prisoners who were detained in the same building as you. You mentioned Ye Na and her family as prisoners who were already there. We're familiar with who Ye Na is. You also mentioned the names of some new prisoners who were put in the building at the same time as you. Could you tell us again the names of the prisoners who were put in that building with you and who they were?
Answer. I did not dare to ask other prisoner names because I was warned after I was asking and talking to my friend Rom. I was one prisoner among the last batch. When I arrived in that prison, I could see prisoners had already been put in that place. There were new prisoners coming in, but I did not dare to ask their names because I got one experience already.
Earlier, you told us that when you first arrived at Krang Tachan, that your baby cried for 3 days and that she was beaten. Can you explain what happened to your baby and who it was that hit or beat, or who it was that hit your baby?
Answer. My baby was crying, and the one who hit my baby was Singh. I heard people call him Singh when I was working outside. And prisoners were asked to go and search for catfish or krachow fish. And my baby was asked to catch the catfish or baby fish so that my baby could die. It was very painful for me at that time, and I pray for Buddha to help my baby. And my baby caught the fish, but he was not bitten by the fish.
Madam Witness, did your baby manage to survive and live through the time that you were at Krang Tachan?
Yes.
And a couple more questions about the conditions at this prison. Can you tell us whether prisoners became sick there often, and whether medical treatment was provided to the prisoners when they were sick?
In the building that I stayed, there was one man by the name of June who was a former soldier, and he was blind in both eyes. His wife was Pon, and they had a child, Pi, and they were housed in the same building. Initially, they were allowed to stay out, but he was so hungry, so he stole a chicken egg, and he was caught and placed in that building and was not allowed to stay out. Allow me to tell you that in that building there were many mice running around, and he caught a mouse alive, and because of his hunger, he ate that mouse alive, and he gave some meat to his child and to his wife, but his wife did not dare eat the meat of the mouse. And about a month later, his body became swollen. So was his child, and they were not given any medical treatment, not at all. And as a result, he died. His child also died. And when he died, his body was dragged off the wooden floor toward the exit door, and because the exit door was laid with barbed wire, so his corpse was caught with the barbed wire, and you could see the wounds and the marks on the dead body. And sometimes prisoners were being beaten up, and I could have a look through the crack of the wall, and I saw those prisoners were being beaten up, and some of them were swollen. And that's what I actually saw with my own eyes while I was there.
The former soldier that you just told us about, who was blind and who died after eating a rat, when you say he was a former soldier, do you know, was he a Khmer Rouge soldier, or was he a soldier for the Lon Nol regime?
Jun was a former Khmer Rouge soldier.
You had started to tell us about when you were taken for interrogation. You indicated that you were detained for 7 days, shackled, and after 7 days you were released from your shackles and taken to sit on a metal chair in the interrogation place. Can you describe for us, as best you remember, what happened when you were interrogated?
When I reached the area, I was asked to sit on this small chair, and I was asked where I hid a pistol. But I myself was not aware of any pistol. I did not have any pistol with me. The only thing I had was the clothes that I was wearing. And I had some clothes, but it was at the cooperative. And that one of the questions that I was asked. Then they asked me as to what level of education I studied, and I replied that I studied at the Tukmi College at the third grade in the old education system. And then they told me that, then they asked me, how did my husband introduce me to the KGB or June spy network? And I replied that I did not know anything about the KGB or the June spy. Although my husband and I were a couple, we rarely stayed together, as my husband stayed at the front battlefield and I stayed at the rear battlefields to provide treatment to the wounded soldiers. And after I gave that response, I was weeping. Then one of them was about to hit me with a tree stump, but he was stopped by another person. Then they told me to return and to write my summary biography about my background, about what my husband did, or my parents did, or what I did before I started working. I was not beaten physically, but I was hurt emotionally. They teach me that because I was good looking, that's why my husband really loved me. And that caught my attention, that I knew they knew that my husband was detained there. That's why they knew about my husband and I. And I was sure that he was detained there and that he died there. And on another occasion, I was told by Yepon that my husband was killed near a tree to the west of the compound. And I decided to go there and see whether I could find the skeleton remains of my husband. And I actually tried to chase the cows through the west side. However, I actually just tried to move closer to that tree. And upon reaching the tree location, I saw many skeleton remains. And I couldn't say which bones belonged to my husband. I was then transferred to another location because they said that I went to an area that I was not supposed to go to. And one day, Yipon and I and other people were led to go to outside the compound near an area near a pond where there were no houses of the nearby villagers. At around 8 or 9 o'clock, I saw them sharpening a curved-looking knife. Then they played music over a loud speaker, and we were walked in line, but we were not tied up because we didn't have any strength to flee due to the insufficient food. And I saw these people walked in line, though I did not know where they were taken to be killed. I tried to go out under the pretext that I go to relieve myself, but in fact I just want to see what happened to those people. Though I did not see the act of killing myself, I saw bloodstains on them and on the knife, and they washed themselves in the pond. At that time, I wanted to know how they killed those people, so I would know how my husband was killed, as I knew my husband had already been killed. But I didn't see how they killed those people. I only saw bloodstains all over their bodies when they came to cleanse themselves in the pond. So I made my own conclusion that my husband was not killed by a bamboo stick, but was killed by a long knife, as the one that I saw.
Madam Witness, you just mentioned a fellow prisoner named Ye Pon, a person who told you about where your husband had been killed. Can you tell us who Ye Pon was? What did you know about her?
Ye Pon was the husband of June, the man who died, as I mentioned. She did not commit any wrongdoing, and before the country was liberated, she was in charge of the blind people, and she was accused of exchanging an elephant for the vehicles of those people coming from Phnom Penh. And she knew that my husband was killed at the location that she told me.
Did Ye Pon, was she one of the survivors of Khmer Rouge, or did she die at that prison?
Before Phnom Penh fell, Ye Pon was told to prepare her belongings as she will be sent back home and that she had been re-educated. So Ye Pon and another young girl by the name of Vươn were sent her way. However, I did not know whether they ever returned to their village or not, as they had left before I left.
I want to go back to your interrogation that you described for us. Can you tell us how many cadres were there who interrogated you? How many people interrogated you, and do you know the names of any of the prison cadres who interrogated you?
The chief was Ta An, and Taping was the one who interrogated me, and there was also another man by the name of Jane, though I don't know whether he was in any real position. And there were these 3 or 4 people who were interrogating me at that time.
And you mentioned that one of the people started to hit you with a club, but was stopped by one of the others. Can you tell us who it was that was going to hit you and who it was that stopped that person?
It was Ping who was about to beat me up. However, An, the chief, said that I was innocent and that it was my husband who did the wrongdoing. So then they instructed me to write my own biography, and that it would not be long before I died.
After you wrote your biography, were you ever interrogated again?
Kế
they stopped interrogating me by then. However, I was detained in that house for another week. Then I was let out to work in the field with other inmates, including the children of Yenho, Dam, and Earned. We were asked to carry earth and termite Mount Earth as well. And I became ill, physically ill, as I worked so hard in carrying the earth at the time. And the symptoms still persist today. And even when I was assigned to do the rice transplantation, I had to work very hard in order to achieve the work quota. And while I was transplanting the rice, there were some small little frogs in the field, and I caught them and put them in my hid them in my pocket. So when I returned to the kitchen, I used an old cooking pot left from the previous prisoners and cooked those little frogs and ate them. And during the frog hunting night, usually they would cut off the frog heads and throw them away. And I would I would pick those frog heads up, put them into the soup, and try to eat it in order to survive. We were mistreated in every manner, although they did not physically beat us up. And I asked Yipon why I was not beaten up and that I was only threatened. And she said, for those people like myself who were not beaten up means that I would be used to provide the service in the prison until the day I died. As for those who were sent away and killed, none of them survived. And only us who were spared because they needed us to provide them with the service within the compound.
Mr. President, at this time I'd like to provide one more document for the witness to see. This is another Krang Tachan interrogation notebook, document D157.7, D157.7, and the ERN references are Khmer 00270-874, English 00866-434, French 00872-809. These are notes relating to the interrogation of this witness at Krang Tachan.
Yes, you may do so.
Okay, before we do this, please, we are back to the issue of torture, possibly torture-tainted evidence. What are the notes about? Not the substance, but obviously the quality of the notes. What's in the notes?
The notes have biographical information on her and then a summary of matters on which she was interrogated. So the purpose of questioning is simply to, well, there are a number of things I want to ask the witness about, whether she's familiar with how these notes were kept, whether someone recorded, and also whether this refreshes her recollection about subject matters she was interrogated about.
Can we please keep the document away from the witness until we have decided? Take it away until we have decided, please. Thank you.
President, the co-prosecutor, the chamber grants you the use of the document. However, please try to avoid the substance of the document in your question. And court officer, please deliver the document for the witness examination.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I just ask and clarify something. I know we'll have the debate on torture-tainted evidence in a very short time, so I don't want to go into any details. But if I understood you correctly, and please tell me if I didn't, you're confronting her with a statement that was taken when she most probably wasn't was maltreated, and you want to confront her with the substance of what she said then. Wouldn't that be the core of the protection?
No. The Torture Convention is intended to prevent people from relying on the truth of confessions. It allows us to introduce evidence that she was interrogated and made statements. So the issue here is simply, what was she interrogated about? Did she make this statement? And who does she know who kept these notes? These are all uses. None of these uses are in any way barred by the Article 15 of the Torture Convention.
There is no problem with who made this statement. There is no problem with did you make this statement. But there might be a potential problem with did you say what this and this in the statement.
My question was not going to be to confirm whether she said these things, whether they're true, but just to know, does this refresh her about the questions that were asked to her? I think it is entirely appropriate to use this evidence to find out what she was being interrogated about, not for the truth of it, but to know what the purpose of the interrogation was. Madam Witness, the page on which there are notes relating to you is at a page that I've marked, Khmer 00270-874. My first question to you is whether you remember whether there was anyone who was recording or taking notes while you were being interrogated that day.
Yes, somebody was taking a note, and in fact it was Anne who was taking note at the time.
Do you recognize the handwriting of these notes? Are you able to tell us whether this is Anne's handwriting?
He was sitting at the far end of the table, so I could not see the handwriting. However, allow me to tell you that although I didn't confess, they would just write down what they wanted in the document. One day I was taken food to the pig's pen, and the interrogation house was not far from the pig pen, although there was a cassava plantation in between. I could clearly hear what was being said in the interrogation house. They asked about whether the person was a new person, or whether that person held the rank of a captain in the army. And the response was no, I was not. Then I heard the sound of a whipping. And then they asked the question again, whether he held a rank of a captain, and he said no. And the same process kept repeating until the end. He confessed that he was a captain, and their response was to avoid being beaten again. So I could conclude that they could write anything as they wished in the response, as they would consider that was my confession. That's how I would conclude.
One last question on these notes and your interrogation. There is a reference in here to Kong, the head of Hospital 22. Do you remember being asked questions during your interrogation about Kong?
No, I was not asked questions about the person. They asked me questions about my husband and his role in educating me.
Mr. President, the civil parties have ceded all the time for questioning this witness to me. I have about 10 more minutes to finish my questions. I can proceed now if you wish, or proceed after the break, but I'd request an additional 10 minutes to finish my questioning.
President, you may proceed then, and there was a slight delay during the start of the session this morning as well, so you can proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Madam Witness, you told us about witnessing some people being taken away for executions and about music being played. I have a few more questions that I want to ask you about the subject of prisoner executions at Krang Tachan. Can you tell us how often were prisoners taken away from your detention building during the time you were there? How often did you see people being taken away and taken out to the west side of the prison that you talked about?
It was rather often until those big pits were filled. And after that, prisoners were taken out of the first fence perimeter, that is, within the first and the second fence perimeter where people were not allowed to trespass. So when the pits within the first fence perimeter were filled, then they were taken out and killed outside the first fence perimeter, but within the second fence perimeter. And I would like to tell you about one incident that I still experience at present. A soldier was detained near me, and he said that he was missing his family, and he was brought to be detained at Krang Tachan. And during his interrogation, he was severely beaten up. His entire body was wounded, and throughout the night he cried from the wounds. He cried for his parents. He cried for his mother to help him throughout the night, and next day he was interrogated again, and I and other workers who were carrying us to the west part of the interrogation house, and if I am not mistaken, a prisoner could only escape during the interrogation time. At that time, they will be untied. So the person jumped over the first fence perimeter, and then he could also jump over the second fence perimeter, and we were looking at him running away, and the soldiers who were guarding us ordered the workers to go and chase him. He was caught up. He was beaten until he became unconscious. Then they tied his feet and dragged him over the rice field. His clothes were torn, and he was bleeding all over his body. And at the end, he was dragged back into his sleeping cell. And that's what I witnessed personally. I couldn't say how much pain that was inflicted upon him. Next day, he was told that he would be sent back to his unit. He was put on the motorbike, and then there was another person who was sitting behind him with a rifle. But from my experience, I believed that he would not be returned to his unit. And there was another incident that there was a female peasant who wanted to flee while working in the rice field. And she said that she wanted to go and quickly relieve herself in a nearby bush. And she was hiding herself behind a termite mound. And then we were ordered to go and find her. And in fact, she was hiding under the Contrincat tree near the termite mound. She was then arrested, brought back, and beaten up. She was badly beaten. And it was so pity to witness such an incident. And there were many more incidents that I personally witnessed during the time that I was detained there. Although it was not inflicted upon me, but I felt the pain that those people suffered, and I could imagine the suffering that my other relatives received when they were being beaten up.
Thank you, Madam Witness. You told us about an incident where you saw guards or people sharpening their knives. You saw a line of people being walked to an area where there were graves, and after you saw them cleaning blood from their swords. My question is, who were the people who were sharpening their swords and then cleaning the blood off of them? Do you remember the names of any of these people?
I think I was in a rush to know what happened to those people, and I couldn't clearly see who they were due to the bushes, and I did not have time to have a proper observation. I only had a quick look at it, and then I moved.
Could you tell us when it was that you left Krang Tachan and the circumstances of how you survived and were able to leave that prison?
during a harvest season, we were asked to harvest the season to stress it. And then the rice would be put into a rice barn. And at that time, I heard the sound of a gunfire from a distance. And a few days later, we were told that we had to pack our belongings and we had to move on, as we could no longer stay there. And they killed those people that they didn't want to let go, and they broadcast over a loudspeaker that it was unsafe to remain in that compound and that we had to leave by midnight. And that night we couldn't sleep because we were afraid that we would be killed. But we were not called, and only certain prisoners were called. Their names were called out to be killed, including Rome, who was my friend. And I knew of a date from the scarf that he had. And we were told that those people would be sent first, and that my group would be sent by dawn. And we couldn't sleep because we knew that we would be killed during the night. So the first group went, and in the morning we were not allowed to go out, and then they cooked gruel for us. And I went to the pond where I saw those people who cleansed their body with blood, and that's where I saw the scarf of Rome. Then I knew that surely Rome was killed, because the scarf was caught in the barbed wire. And I knew that they were not being transferred elsewhere, but instead they were killed. And then we were told that we would be transferred. Ihan and I were amongst them, and she had a 3-month baby when she was detained, but in 2 years' time, the baby could walk. So we saw people going to the upper part, and we were not allowed to go with those villagers. And we simply followed them as we didn't know the area well. So Ihan, the lady, and I moved along together with them, and when we reached Posat, Han luckily met her husband and reunited with her husband. But sadly, I did not meet any of my relatives. And several months after, and we heard that Vietnamese soldiers were approaching the area, and that there were aerial bombardment by the Vietnamese troops. And when the situation quieted down, I returned to my village at the beginning of the transplantation season, and that's how I survived the regime.
One last question that I have to ask you about, Madam Witness. One of the surviving prisoners from Krang Tachan, this is in document E319/20.2, has indicated that you had a relationship with Prison Chief On at some point. Is it true? Did you have a relationship with Prison Chief On? And if so, was this something that you wanted to do or something that you were forced to do? Can you tell us that, please?
This is simply a rumor. And Ta'an was the chief of the prison, and I personally did not have any relationship whatsoever with a person who killed my husband. I was a prisoner there, so it is impossible for me to have a relationship with the killer of my husband.
Thank you, Madam Witness, for answering all my questions today. Mr. President, I have no further questions.
President, thank you. It is now appropriate for our lunch break. We take a break now and resume at 1:30 this afternoon. Court officer, please make an arrangement to assist the witness during the lunch break and invite her as well as the TPO staff back into the courtroom at 1:30. Security personnel are instructed to take Kirsampon to the waiting room downstairs and have him return to attend to the proceedings this afternoon before 1:30. The court is now in recess.